Today we're going to be talking about truth, and we're going to be talking about truth under pressure. Most of us like to hear the truth, right? I mean, well, let's put it this way. We like to hear the truth. It doesn't mean we always want to tell the truth. We want our kids to tell us the truth, right? But do we always tell our kids the truth? Now, kids, I'm not asking you to answer because you think, oh, they tell me part of the truth. They don't tell me all the truth. We want to hear the truth from our parents. We want our leaders to tell the truth. We want our ministers to tell us the truth. How about this one? How would you like it if you logged on to your social media and what you read was actually the truth without a slant? Who would sign up for that? I think we all would. Because everything we've got has a slant, and sometimes truth just becomes way too elusive. I learned this, that I realized I struggled with this early on in life. I didn't realize it till later, but I remember my mom had taken me and the siblings to the store in Amber, so must have been an emergency for her to take the 4 siblings to the store in Amber and actually let us go in. I don't know if she's afraid we would move the car or what. Anyway, she took us in, and the store in Amber wasn't very big. It only had like 3 or 4 aisles, and the front aisle had all the candy right by the window. And you know that's where I went. And so I stopped and I looked and I was like, man, there's a 3-cent piece of gum. Yes, I know I just aged myself. There's nothing in a store for 3 cents anymore. But I was like, man, I really want a piece of gum. My mom has already laid down the rule. You're getting nothing in the store. Don't even ask. Moms, how many of you have ever said that before? I see all the kids looking back at Mom. Yeah, she says it all the time. And so I squatted down and I was like, I think if I palm one of these, nobody's going to know. I looked around real quick and I picked up a piece of gum, kind of slid it in my pocket. Nobody knew. And you know that moment when you're getting ready to open the door and you know what you did wrong, but nobody else knows, and I pushed open the door, and the lady didn't say a word. Got out to the car. I was like, yes, I won. I got away with it. I sat down in the car, and I was thinking about, I got away with it. And I took out the piece of gum, and I began to unravel it so I could put it in my mouth. And what do you think my mom said? Who said it over here? Where did you get that? I was faced with 2 things. Number 1, do I lie and tell my mom I had money? Or do I confess and know that I'm going to have to pay the consequences for what I just did? And being the strong adult, kid, male, I decided I'm going to lie to my mom as good as I can. And I learned a lesson that day. If your mom asks you a question, she already knows the answer to that question she just asked. She's wanting to know if you're going to lie or not. And I lied. I said, I had a nickel in my pocket and I paid. Well, when did you pay? I was in the store all day. I mean, the store wasn't very big. It's not as big as our lobby, hardly. Pretty quick. And she's like, no, you didn't. Go right back in there, mister, and go pay for that piece of gum. And when you get home, I can't remember if I got a spanking or my mouth washed out, but I got one of those 2 things. And I learned something. And later as I looked on that, I realized that there are times when I'm presented with the opportunity to tell the truth. But when pressure happens, when I'm put under pressure, I have a tendency to want to do what's easiest, to avoid a battle. As I look back, I have to make sure that when pressure comes, and whatever the situation is, even as adults, for different times, I have to make sure, what is the truth, and am I saying the right thing? You're like, why would you struggle with that? I don't know. There's a part in me, and I think we're going to see it today as we look at the character we're going to do that has revealed this. The hardest truths aren't the ones we don't know. They're the ones we know, but we don't want to pay for. The hardest truths aren't the ones we don't know. They're the ones we know, but we don't want to pay for. And that holds true in every situation. I've seen it over and over and over in people's lives. Last week, as we looked at the Vantage Point series, we talked about how that Jesus' disciples had this misguided expectation of who Jesus was. And it gets so shipwrecked as Jesus enters Jerusalem on this big celebration day, and then they catch Jesus weeping. And suddenly, their expectations are dashed, and almost their faith is. Today, we're going to move a little bit further into Matthew chapter 27 and Luke chapter 23. And so much has happened since that fateful day that they came on the triumphal entry, and they're celebrating, saying, this is exactly what's going to happen. Since then, Jesus has had the Last Supper with his apostles. He sits down with one of them, and there he says, well, one of you is going to betray me. He tells Peter, you know what, you're getting ready to deny me 3 times. And they go to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus is arrested. And the rest of that night, the Sanhedrin, which just simply was the makeup of the Pharisees and the Sadducees of the Jewish leaders, they bring Jesus before what you would call a kangaroo court. Can you imagine being arrested in 1 minute, and the next you're on trial? And he is taken to the leader of the high priest's house, and they begin to grill him back and forth in the middle of the night. And they want Jesus to be crucified. They want him to be convicted. And their big problem is Jesus has blasphemed against what they feel like is the Holy Spirit. More importantly, they feel like he's blasphemed against the high priest. And so they take Jesus, they beat him, they make fun of him, they do everything that they can do, and then they say, you're convicted. We want to put you to death. But there's a small fly in the ointment, and what that is, they can't kill anybody. They want to put him to death immediately, but they can't do it because the Romans have said, you know what, you guys are under our rule, and no longer can you put anybody to death. We have to prove that. And so they decide, what are we going to do with Jesus? Where do we take him? What do we do? And they realize that the governor, Pilate, is in town. Almost everybody's in town because the Passover is such a big deal. The Jerusalem population swells. And so they decide to take Jesus to Pilate. But here's the problem. Pilate doesn't want anything to do with Jesus. He's probably heard the scuttlebutt. He sure wasn't going to put Jesus to death because he blasphemed the high priest. This guy doesn't care about the high priest whatsoever. And so the Sanhedrin decides, not only am I going to put a guy on trial, we've got to make up 3 charges. The first was that they said that Jesus was trying to cause riots in Rome. That's something Rome couldn't stand. Pilate looks at that and is like, it's a false charge. He knew there wasn't any truth to that. The second one they tried to say was Jesus didn't even pay his taxes. But I'm sure Pilate had heard the story, everybody else had, that Jesus comes along and they're like, hey, who do you pay taxes to? And he catches a fish and he takes out the denarius and he holds it up and he says, you give to Caesar what is Caesar and you give to God what is God's. And so he knew that was a false charge. So the third one was the only thing he felt like he could ever say about Jesus is this. Jesus claims to be king. And that was something that could not take place. Luke tells us in Luke chapter 23, verse 2, he says this. And they began to accuse him, saying, this is the Sanhedrin, the leaders, we have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar, and he claims to be Messiah, a king. And with these false charges, they take Jesus to Pilate. I want to stop here for just a second and add something. If you've ever read the account of the last few hours of Jesus' life, and you've read them through Matthew, who kind of writes from the perspective of a Jewish leader, or Mark, who kind of gives you a short and condensed version, most people think he's giving you Peter's viewpoint. Or Luke, who's writing from a Gentile perspective. And then John, who's kind of writing it later and putting it all together and said, this was the theme underneath it. It can get really confusing if you look at the timeline. You're saying, how do I make all of this fit? Here's how you make it fit. There is a book called The Harmony of the Gospels. And if you can find one, they're found on Amazon, they're found anywhere else, and they break them up and they put them together. Like there may be a word here, a word, but he puts all the Gospels together and it makes so much sense and it brings clarity to everything that you read, especially during this time. And also they will put it into a timeline. And so it's helpful in order to understand what Jesus is going through, who's saying what is actually happening. So I want to encourage you, if you'd like to pick one of those up, it is really helpful to help you go through these things. But let's continue, and you get a picture of what Pilate is doing. He goes on to say in verse 3, so Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you really the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. And then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I don't find any basis for a charge against this man." Pilate brings him in and says, "Are you the king of the Jews or are you the king of everybody?" And Jesus just simply says, I'm the king of the Jews. You've said it. I'm it. And Pilate looks around and says, I don't care if he's the king of the Jews. He's not the king over Rome. I don't have a problem. He goes back and says, I don't have a problem with him. Matthew records it this way. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus again replies, "You have said so." And when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders about this, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Jesus sits back and he's like, "You've said what it is." And when they begin to quiz and needle and question, he sits quietly because he knows the truth. But you see, even before Jesus reaches Pilate, the word has leaked out that there's a big problem. And Pilate knows when it arrives on his doorstep, he just didn't know it was going to come at 6 a.m. When it comes to his doorstep, he's got a situation on his hands. You see, Pilate isn't wrestling with the evidence. He's wrestling with the consequences of what this is going to cost him, what it's going to do to him. All the Gospels all share the same thing. Pilate examines Jesus as much as he can. In fact, 10 times he says, "This man is innocent. Let him go." And every time they're like, "Nope. No, we don't believe." And so Pilate stands at a crossroads in his life. And that crossroads is this: do I do what is right or do I do what will please people? Have you ever been there? Have you ever had a truth on your hands and you knew what was right and you knew what you should do, and you can hear that little voice in the back of your head that I think's the Holy Spirit, and he's saying, you know what you need to be doing? But then sitting beside you is a group of people that are saying, just come on, we got to go do this. It'll be so fun. Come on, if you don't do this, you're a chicken, or whatever they say. You see, Pilate is not popular with the Jewish people, especially the leadership of the church, of the synagogue. And the reason he's not popular with them is just a few years earlier, Pilate wanted to come in and the emperor was going to visit Jerusalem. And Pilate wanted to make a big deal as Tiberius comes in. And so he says, let's take these shields, and there's these large shields, and he wants to take them into the temple and hang them up because the temple was probably the largest building that was in Jerusalem. And he wanted to show Tiberius, you're more important than anything else. And he was getting ready to march in the temple and even into the Holy of Holies and hang these shields. And the leaders of the Sanhedrin says, no, you're not. You're not going in our temple. You're an unclean Gentile. And not only that, you're not going to defile the temple of the holy God by putting that evil man's picture on a shield in there. And they were so upset about it, they laid it down out in front of the temple, and they extended their necks to show Pilate, if you want to go do this, it will be literally over our dead body. You can cut our heads off, but you're not going to put those those shields up in the temple. And Pilate reneges. He backs off. But it wasn't that he learned his lesson. A year or two after that, Pilate realizes that, you know what, I'd really like to build an aqueduct in Jerusalem so we can have water to more people. But the leadership in Rome would not give Pilate the money to build that aqueduct. And so he decides, he looks around, where do I get the money? I want my name to be known to be able to do this. And he enters into the temple and he breaks into the temple treasury and robs it to fund his pet project. And Israel and the leaders of the Jewish community hate him. And for them to bring Jesus up to him was a difficult decision they made, but they felt like he owed them. And so here's Pilate with a group of people that don't like him at all, and he really probably doesn't care for them either. And he's asking himself this question: do I save myself, or do I do what is right? Or face an onslaught of hatred and potentially lose my job and maybe even more lose my life? Have you ever been faced with the tension? Do I please God or do I please other people? Do we do what is right and risk the fallout, or do we do what is safe and keep control? It is the tension of this text, but it is the tension of our lives. Does Pilate knows Jesus is innocent? You know, most of the time we know what is right. We know what is wrong. But sometimes we're pulled in a different direction. So what do you do when obeying the truth will cost you more than disobeying it? I think that's a question we have to ask, because that is a real thing. I was in high school, and I wasn't a star athlete like Bennett Posey down here. I was just good enough to get on the field. And so my coach had decided, well, he's too slow to turn a double play at second base. Maybe he'll be good enough to play center field. And so I got moved to center field. And we were playing a ball game, and it was kind of my first or second game out there. And the player hit the ball. It was a line drive. And I thought, I think I can get to it, but I didn't. It went over the fence. And as I turned back in, I expected to see the umpire raise his hands that it was a home run. But instead, he raised his hands and says, it's a double, because he thought it bounced over the fence. And then he points at me. And you know what I did? I said, no, it went over the fence. My coach was so mad, he threw his hat and his glove, because it cost me for telling the truth. It went from a double where we had the bases almost full to a 3-run home run in 1 minute, all because I opened my mouth. And I got back to the dugout, and my coach was like, what were you thinking? I said, he asked me. I had to tell him the truth. He goes, it's not your job. That's his job as the umpire. I said, well, he asked me, did you want me to lie? And he said, well, of course I didn't want you to lie, but you didn't have to tell him the truth. Look at what it cost us. Everybody was mad at me. And we lost the game. A few years, actually this past year, I had the opportunity to do my coach's funeral service. And I told this story. And his sons just started cracking up. And they said, we hoped you would use that story. Because my dad was mad at you that day. And he told everybody about it. But on the backside, he respected you because you told the truth when it cost us something. Now, in the minute, he was ready to kill you. But for the moment, I was right, in what I did, but it cost my team. You see, the truth isn't always going to be popular. Doing what is right isn't always going to be easy. And there's going to be time after time after time that when you stand up for what is right or you stand up for the truth, it's going to cost you. And you have to plan ahead. John records this as he is looking at the whole scene. And he says, Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders." Jesus is saying, I'm going to tell you something, Pilate, you're not that much in control. You're really not. If I didn't want arrested, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't even gone to the Jewish leaders. But I'm allowing this because my kingdom is more important than what's taking place here. But what takes place here is important for all of our future. He continues, but now my kingdom is from another place. You are king then? Pilate asked. And Jesus answered, you say that I'm king. In fact, the reason I was born and I came into this world is to testify to truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Pilate retorted. With this, he went out again to the Jews and gathered there and said, I find no basis for your charges against him. Did you catch what Pilate asked him? What is truth? How many times have you thought, what is truth? You get a truth that's presented on Facebook and Instagram. You get a truth. You see people post things about your life, and then later you learn they're two totally different things. Or you hear something that you think is a news feed, and it comes out, and you begin to tell other people, and then 5 minutes later they're like, that's fake news. Why didn't you look that up? What is truth? Sometimes you have friends that pull you in and say, this is what is truth. Here's what you need to follow. And you follow that, and you're like, that's not really true. Jesus comes along when Pilate's like, what's truth after all? Rome's telling me one thing, your Sanhedrin is telling me another. What do I say is truth? Jesus says, I am the truth. Does that sound familiar to what John also writes in John chapter 14, verse 6? I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. Jesus is the truth. I found at times I resemble Pilate in some ways. And here's some major ones. I might acknowledge the truth, but it doesn't always mean I obey it. Have you ever found yourself there? You know what is right. Truth acknowledged doesn't mean truth is obeyed. You know what is right, but when things get under pressure, you begin to say, I'm not actually living the way it is. Like, I know what is healthy. But I'm going to tell you, there were a few years in there that I would have a cheesecake factory cheesecake in my refrigerator, and I would eat it for breakfast. You guys laugh, you'd do it too. The best thing is just to stay away from it. Just keep Satan away. We all know that it's not healthy to drink and to drive, but how many times have you known, or you got in a car with somebody that drinks and drives, and you're like, but it was the only option I had. We know the truth, but we don't always obey it. The truth is one of those things that we can acknowledge it, but until we let it put inside of us and manage every decision that we make, it tends to be somewhat elusive. And I've found the pressure that tends to lead me to not obeying the truth is that my fear, or our fear, leads to compromise. If you go back and you read the accounts of the trial of Jesus before Pilate, he's scared about his future. He's so scared that he sends Jesus to Herod, and Herod and Pilate hated each other. Herod was the king of the Jews, put in place by Rome. And he had more power, and he happened to be in Jerusalem at this time. And so Pilate says, you know what, Jesus is from Galilee, so Herod, this is your problem. Herod looks at him and says, nah, it's not really my problem, it's your problem. And sends him back. And Pilate is scared about his life and his health and his job. And he's not operating on what's true, but what he thinks is best for him. He knows that King Herod is watching him. He knows that Rome is watching him, that the emperor is watching him closely because things have not gone well. And if you want to lose your job as a governor, then you let chaos happen in Jerusalem during a time in which the population has swelled to 4 to 5 times its normal size. So Pilate isn't asking what is true. He's asking what will keep me safe. He's asking what will make the most people like me for most of the time. You see, we tend to get in trouble when we answer our answer, but what will get me in the least amount of trouble? It doesn't mean this is right. Don't believe me? Watch your kids. Ask them a question, what they did. Who broke that? And they quickly begin to tell you the other child. And suddenly, nobody's done it. It just accidentally fell off. How about when you get confronted by your spouse about something you know you probably should have told them? We dance quick, don't we? We move. How about when our boss looks at us and a major mistake has been made? Do we stand up and say, yeah, I'm the one that did it? Or do we avoid the truth and point to somebody else? Because fear tends to lead to compromise. There are 3 passages that I find extremely enlightening that I think we need to look for our application. It's this. The first one is found in Matthew chapter 27, verse 17 and 18. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, which one of them do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah? For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. Every year at the Passover, nobody knows where this began, but every year at the Passover, the governor or the highest ranking official would release a prisoner and let them go free. And the people got to choose who that prisoner was. And so Pilate thinking, I've got another way to get out of this problem. He decides if I put Jesus against Barabbas, they will surely treat and accept Jesus, because remind you, just a few hours before, Jesus had the triumphal entry, and now all of a sudden they're out for blood. Surely that will change when they put them side by side and compare. The Bible calls Barabbas a murderer. Most likely he's an insurrectionist, and he was due to be killed. Pilate thought they had the option. They would choose the right thing. And essentially, he's trying to pass his responsibility of choosing right and wrong to somebody else. And that's the first application. We can't pass off the responsibility of choosing truth to other people. We have to decide for ourselves what is right and what is wrong and what we're going to stand up for. We're going to have to choose truth or rightness regardless of the people that are around us. We are. If you're a people pleaser, you're going to struggle with this. You're going to fight this for your entire life. You think you can wait to make a decision and hopefully somebody else will make it for you. But you're going to have to be the one that chooses to say no at the right time. If you look around and maybe you're a student, you see somebody getting pushed around and bullied and someone's forcing others, you're going to have to be the one that stands up because you know what is right. You know that the Bible tells you to love people and to love others with all and as the way that you love Jesus, and that's how you said it. You're going to have to be the one that tells your friend, if you're older, whether you're an adult or whatever, don't get in that car and drive. You're going to have to be the one that chooses to tell those at work, you know what, let's move forward. You have to set the example. You can't wait until somebody else does it. It didn't work for Pilate either. And it won't work for you. The second thing is found in Matthew chapter 27, verse 19 and 20. When Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message. Matthew is the only one that records this tidbit of information. It says, don't have anything to do with this innocent man. For I have suffered a great deal in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. You and I, our lesson is this. We have to listen to the right voices in our lives. I find it astonishing that in the middle of a trial, that Pilate's own wife had the power to send a message to him. And yet in that same trial, he completely ignores what she has to say. She says, I've had a dream and I've been tormented. This man is innocent. Let him go. And yet Pilate, in the other side of his ear, is hearing from the elders and the chief priests that are saying, we want him dead. We want him dead. We want him dead. And yet she's saying he's innocent. Who does he listen to? He listened to the wrong ones. We all have people that talk to us all the time. We have people that give us a lot of advice. It cracks me up when people ask for advice for different things on social media and the different answers that they get. Who do you listen to? It's good to get advice. In fact, Proverbs says this in Proverbs 12:15. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. The problem is we have so much advice out there today that who do we listen to? And that is we have to listen to the right voices. We have to listen to people whose advice is worth listening to. Social media isn't going to be that place, I hate to tell you. I don't know about ChatGPT or any of the other AI. I know it's there and I know they give advice and some of it's good. But I think we have to have some criteria. Our teachers want to give us advice if we're student, parents, everyone. So who do we listen to? I think the best way to determine who to listen to, who's been in your life the longest. You see, if they've been there the longest, it means they've seen the good and the bad in you. They've seen what you struggle with. They've seen the things that lift you up. They know your character. And they're also willing to say the hard things. Another way that I think who we should listen to is we listen to the person or to the people whose life they seem to have in pretty good order. Not to the one that's in chaos around you and they're kind of like, hey, would you join my chaos? That's not usually a good plan. I find it interesting. Pilate listens to people who hate him. And the one who loved him, he ignored. How often have you ignored the people that love you and you've listened to the people who have no real positive interest in your life? I believe God should belong in your list of advice. What does the Bible have to say? Where do I go for that? That's one of the best ones. The last one is this. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took the water and he washed his hands in front of the crowd. And he stops and he looks at them. I can almost hear the anguish and the struggle in his voice. And he says, I'm innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility. And all the people answered, this is haunting almost. His blood is on us and our children. Our choices will always have consequences. What we choose will have a consequence. Pilate doesn't know that the choice that he makes was already pre-planned before it got to him, because Jesus wanted to save us. But I believe that his choice of giving in to the pressure of the Jewish people had major consequences on the rest of his life. And I believe he knows it from the second that it clicked in his mind that my only safe option is to give Jesus up. And he goes to a bowl of water, and he kind of does it to spite the Jewish people. But he also does it because I believe he feels there's a blackness in his heart when he knows he's made the wrong choice. And he tries to wash his hands, and he tries to pass his responsibility, the consequence, what he did, to somebody else. And it doesn't work. It scares me to listen. And what the Jewish people said actually becomes true. This blood will be on our heads and the heads of our children. It was Jesus' blood that does save them, but not the way that they were thinking. You and I come here today, and we've got the same question before us with Jesus. What are we doing with him? Are we accepting him? Do we look at Jesus and say, this is who I'm going to follow? Or do we say, you know what, I'm just not ready now. I want to let somebody else make that decision for me. My parents go to church. That's good enough for me. I take my kids on youth group night, and they go to that. That's good enough, right? I'm a good parent. Or I'm a pretty good guy, or I'm a pretty good lady. I make the right decisions. I try to do what, but I don't know that I really need Jesus as a part of my life. That's what Pilate said. I really don't need him. So the question before you is, what are you doing with him? Are you going to accept him, the truth? He says, I'm the truth. And earlier he said, I am the truth and the way. No one comes to the Father but through. Are you going to accept him? Are you going to accept him by following him? And I think there's a lot of us who are believers that said, yeah, we've accepted Jesus, but we haven't fully bought into him. And today you have that choice. Tradition tells us that within the next 7 years, Pilate is removed from Rome, from Jerusalem back to Rome, because of the way he treated some people cruelly. I believe from that moment his life changed because he denied having a relationship with Jesus. You and I, every choice we make has a consequence. And I hope today you will make the choice to follow him, whether it's your first time and accept him, or whether it's you recommitting and re-saying, I'm going to be all in with him. If you want to make one of those decisions, I want to have a word of prayer as the worship team comes up. And if you want to talk with me over here, and I know we'll have a lady over here willing to pray, we just want to pray with you. And we want you to be on the side of the Savior. Let us stand and let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father,